Welcome, my dear ones. This is Tracey Anderson-Askew, your host for the Transform Your Birth podcast, changing your mind about birth one story at a time. Each week, we'll be exploring a birth story through the lens of what birth can teach us. I'll be digging deep into each story so you can learn what it is that can change the way a birth unfolds. We can't control birth, but we can influence it. So listen in to find out how. Enjoy. Today I'm going to share with you some important information every woman must know when it comes to choosing to use the pharmacological options in managing labour. They are tools in your toolkit to help manage labour, but you might want to put them in the bottom of the bag as they come at a cost to you and also to the baby. When women don't have the drugs, they often experience a natural high, which sets her up beautifully for the next stage. Sometimes, however, it can be appropriate to protect the emotional state of the mother and also the baby. Most of the time, however, we don't need it. I will help you to know when it might be appropriate. This is important information to know when it comes to making decisions. I also give some great advice for those supporting birthing women, how to get her over the hump if she's asking for the drugs. Enjoy. Hello there, it's Tracey with you again this week, and today I'm going to be talking about the drugs. Now, this is a bit of a hot topic because when you're a pregnant woman and you're out in public, you're walking around with your bump, and people who you know or even people you don't know will often come up to you and say, "Oh, you're having a baby. Oh, that's lovely. I've got one bit of advice for you. Have the drugs or have the epidural." Now, this type of messaging, whilst it might seem well-intentioned, don't put yourself through it. This is the modern world now. We've got modern technology. Why would you put yourself through it? But when you make a comment like that to a pregnant woman, particularly if she's never had a baby before, there's a message under the message. And the subliminal message is, you're not enough. You can't do it. Now, I'd like to question that. Because if you think for a moment of all of the women who've given birth for you to exist today, women have been giving birth from the beginning of time, that's thousands. Thousands of women have given birth for you to exist long before the drugs were ever invented. Now, we've been able to do that because historically and in different cultures, there's been different traditions around that, and women have been able to find ways of experiencing comfort or find ways to manage labour. Not only that, your body has this incredible hormone called endorphins, and your endorphins are increasing through your pregnancy because endorphins come with sustained effort. And not only are you living, but you're growing a baby. But when you're in labour, if you're relaxed and you're not stressed and you're not releasing stress hormones, your endorphins peak. Okay, so they're there to support you to have a labour that you can manage. And so those people on the streets, instead of saying, "Oh, have the drugs," potentially should be saying, "Darling, you're having a baby. Well, you've got endorphins. Milk those mothers, won't you?" We've got drugs, okay? And we've also found ways to find comfort in labour. I often say, things like a hot pack on your lower back can give you more comfort than morphine because it goes directly to the source of the discomfort, whereas morphine gives you a disassociation from it. And I also call a bath an epidural without the side effects. Okay, so there's a lot of tools that you can use to find comfort in labour before you even think about the drugs. However, the drugs have their place, and that's what I'm going to help you to think about today. Basically, cultivating a belief that you can do it because women have always done it. Have a partner who knows what they're doing to help you find comfort and support. Have a whole lot of tools in your toolkit. And then you pop the drugs down the bottom of the toolkit, okay? Because here's the thing about the drugs. They come at a cost. They come at a cost to you and they come at a cost to your baby. Now, sometimes that cost is worth paying, most of the time we don't need it. In my experience, working with families for well over 20 years now, 60% of my families get through with no need for pain relief, 70% with gas only. Okay, so that helps you to understand that most of the time we don't need it, but it can be appropriate. I often also say to my families, it's important that you're not anti-drugs, because if you're saying to your mind, I don't want the drugs, I don't want the drugs, I don't want the drugs, do you know what your mind hears? Drugs, 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 drugs. Okay, what you fear, you fuel. What you resist, persists. So I think it's important to have a good sense of, yep, I'm likely to get through this with good support and good preparation, particularly if you do some mind training that we do in these classes. It down-regulates your response to stress, which then means that when you're in labour, you're travelling that path of least resistance, where you're so deep, where there's no resistance, no fear, no tension in your body. Then labour becomes more manageable and you're maxing out those beautiful hormones called endorphins, which are the body's natural opiates. Okay, we've got drugs called endorphins. So it's important to have that as your foundation when it comes to making decisions that do have an impact, particularly the drugs. So let's talk about them. There's 3 types. You've got the gas or nitrous oxide, then you've got morphine, and then you've got the epidural. Now, let me just paint a scenario for you. Often women will go into labour and they'll say things like, or just before they go into labour, when they're preparing, they'll say, oh, I'd like to get through without the drugs, but if I need them, I'll take them. Now, that's not a particularly helpful mindset, and I'll tell you why. Because if you're sitting on the fence and then you're in labour, whether it be somebody else's suggestion or it gets a bit, hard, then the mind goes outside of itself for answers before it digs deeper. So we tend to look to be rescued. And any type of little mention of them, that's where that mother's mind will hook onto, I need this, I need that. Okay, what I'm going to suggest you do is don't sit on the fence. Hop into the paddock of absolute belief in yourself that you can do it without it, if that's important to you. Obviously, this is a choice. And then know that you can jump the fence if your situation gets a little bit complex, a bit tricky, and maybe the drugs might actually be quite appropriate. So a woman's at home. She goes into labour spontaneously. She potters around the house. She surprises herself by how she intuitively responds to her labour. She's looking for comfort. She does things that make her comfortable, like maybe standing at the kitchen bench, chopping up some veggies for a soup while she rocks during the contractions. Maybe she's in the garden on all fours, pulling out the weeds and rocking her hips every time she has a contraction. Or she sits on the exercise ball watching TV and swivels her hips around as she has these contractions and just kind of ignores them for a little while. And then they heat up, they get a bit stronger, and she has to focus. And when she's focusing, she's starting to feel and sense the building up of the intensity. She goes into a place that we like to call labour land. Okay, she's gone into a different part of her brain. She's gone more primal. Her cortex layer's gone offline. She can't think anymore. She just has to focus on these contractions. They heat up a little bit. A partner's paying attention. And then she eventually says, oh, I think we need to go to the hospital. You go to the hospital. You meet the midwife. She's lovely. She shows you where everything is in the room. And just as she's about to leave the room, she looks over her shoulder and she says to you, just let me know if you need the gas. Now, that little suggestion isn't a suggestion saying that you're going to need the gas, but that's what the woman in labour's subconscious takes it as. I'm going to need the gas. She has a couple of contractions. The second one takes a breath away. So then she's asking for the gas. And I make this point very clearly because when people around you suggest things to a woman in labour, her mind is likely to hook on to that, assuming she needs it. And so one of the things I encourage my families to do is to not put in your birth preferences sheet the statement, please don't offer us pain relief. We know what's available. We'll ask for it if we need it. You don't want people taking away your confidence when you're in a very vulnerable position. Now, there are models of care that won't even go there, okay? But there are other models of care that have an expectation that you're going to use them or ask for them. And so they're often very helpful in saying things like, oh, look, the anaesthetist is just around the corner. If you want your epidural now, we can get it for you quickly. That in itself sends a clear message to that mother that she's not enough to do it. And so we don't want to plant seeds of doubt, because when women are in labour land, they can just work with this contraction right here, right now. They tend not to ask for the drugs. Do you think home birth women ask for the drugs? No, they don't. Why? Because it's not available. Maybe the nitrous oxide is. Some home birth midwives have the gas. But typically, it's not available. And because it's not available, the mind doesn't go there. So I think it's helpful to understand the psychology around this. Now, getting back to this woman in labour, she asked for the gas because she's now at a point where she doesn't like what she's feeling and she's starting to resist the labour. And there's tension coming into her body and maybe even a little bit of fear. So she hooks onto something in the gas. Now, the gas used to be good because it would get women to focus on their breathing because it was a nose piece. Unfortunately, however, they've taken it from a nose piece and turned it into a mouth piece. And to get it, you've got to suck hard through your mouth. And it's you have to really sort of suck on that, mother. You've kind of got to suck really hard. Now, when you understand the physiology of breathing, when you go from nose breathing to mouth breathing, that creates more of a hyper-alert adrenaline response in the body. So turning it into a mouthpiece, I think, has caused it to lose about 80% of its efficacy. I used to watch women on the gas years and years ago when it was a nose piece, and they tended to look way more comfortable than they do now, sucking on a piece of plastic and trying hard to get that nitrous oxide. Now, women who talk about the benefits of the gas, they say things like, it gave me something to focus on. It took the edge off it. One of the things about the gas, though, is it doesn't take away the pain. It gives you a bit of an altered sense of it. It can make nitrous oxides like happy gas. It can make you feel a bit disassociated. Some women get nauseous, vomiting, and of course the dry mouth isn't much fun. So if you've not had any type of medication or you're particularly sensitive to medication, you can't guarantee that it's going to work for you, because the idea of getting nauseous and vomiting in labour is not much fun when you're dealing with other very big sensations in your body. So she has the gas. Now, the gas doesn't take away the pain. So next minute she's saying, oh, no, this is not working. Give me the morphine. Now, the morphine's quick and easy to administer. It's an injection straight into your bloodstream. The midwife can do it. Now, morphine in labour doesn't take away the pain either. It tends to give you a disassociation from it. So you feel a bit disconnected. Some women like feeling disassociated. Other women do not like it because it can cause them to feel a little bit out of control. Once again, you can have nausea and vomiting with it. Now, the gas, just going back to the gas, I forgot to mention, does go through to your baby, but it is the lightest on your baby because it's coming through the respiratory link, okay? And so it comes through you and through your baby the quickest. So they see the gas as the lightest option. Morphine, on the other hand, tends to be the heaviest on the baby because it's straight into the blood. Now, your carers don't like to give you morphine too late in the labour because of the influence it has on the baby. It can make baby a bit flat when they're born, struggle to breathe, and if they're struggling with that sort of depression of their little nervous system, then they sometimes need an antidote to counteract the effects of the morphine. Now, that experience for both you being disassociated and the baby being a little bit slow and a bit sleepy, and then causes that next phase of looking for the breast and imprinting and meeting you, and that transition into the world kind of gets a bit delayed because they're a little bit sleepy and they're quite drugged up, and it takes about 4 days to go through the baby's liver. So these are the things that it's helpful to know about. Now, some women who talk about the benefits of morphine, though, say things like, it helped me to relax, it helped me to sleep between the contractions. And of course, when we relax and our body releases tension, that can make labour more manageable as well. So it has that sedative effect on the mother. But as I said, they don't like to give it to you too late in the labour. She has the morphine. She wants the pain to go away completely. Okay, so next minute she's asking for the epidural. Now, the epidural does take away the pain. It's the only one that actually takes away the pain. Gas and morphine give you an altered sense of it in about 95% of the cases. Obviously, it depends on the expertise of the person. It's a needle into your spine. And with that comes continuous monitoring, a catheter for your bladder because you can't pee anymore. And then you often need a cannula in your arm with fluids to make sure that you remain hydrated, and generally, not always, but generally another cannula giving you synthetic oxytocin to keep the labour moving along, because epidurals can slow down labour. So it does come with a lot of bells and whistles, and it is a major medical procedure, and they're not always readily available depending on where the anaesthetist is. If they're up doing caesareans, they might not be available to give you an epidural. It just depends on what's happening on the day. But it does give you pain relief. Now, there are side effects with epidurals as well. There's a whole list of potential side effects that can happen, because with anything going in your spine, that's a major medical procedure. It doesn't always give women full benefit. Sometimes women get partially anaesthetized, which in some ways is worse because it highlights the intensity in other parts of their body. But having said that, they're getting very good at doing them, and they're also getting good at giving you the right amount of dosage so that it's not too heavy on your system, because the biggest disadvantage of anaesthetizing your body particularly is highlighted in second stage when you're wanting to push that baby out. And it makes it very difficult if you've had an epidural to assume a good physiological position in order to be able to push your baby out. Now, when I used to be a doula, I'd often, if a woman chose to have an epidural, we'd give her that first dose. I'd say, have a sleep now and get her partner to have a rest and let it wear off so that we can get you over on all fours and help you to push this baby out. And that was quite a good strategy. Other midwives might encourage you to keep topping it up, because the chances of you needing an assisted delivery, which means forceps or the Kiwi cup to help babies who can get stuck when women aren't in good physiological positions, is a little bit higher, and having an epidural in place can make that more comfortable for the mother. So there's two sort of schools of thought around that. But epidurals are incredibly good for caesareans because it means we can be awake for the birth of our baby. They either give you an epidural or a spinal block, and that's a wonderful thing. They're good for very long labours that, where the mother hasn't had any sleep for 1 or 2 days. They're very good for some inductions. Not all inductions need them, but some inductions with synthetic oxytocin can be very, very hard on the mother's body. They can cause that labour to sort of go up the Richter scale a little. And an epidural might be really appropriate to protect the emotional state of the mother so it's not too overwhelming. And of course, the epidural does go through to your baby. So that's the 3 options. Now, where does that leave you? Well, if you learn to breathe well, you're not likely to need the gas. If you learn to relax, you're not likely to need the morphine. If you find yourself in a situation where there's complexity, it's been a long labour, there's been other things that you've needed to deal with, then an epidural might be really appropriate. Okay, but the goal would be to have as little of this stuff in your system as possible, because not only is it impacting your system and the side effects and that next transition once the baby land gets altered, it's also influencing the baby as well. And so having as little of this stuff in your system is the goal, basically. So I hope that's been really, really helpful, because I think sometimes people make these decisions without really understanding the full repercussions, but they can be very helpful, and you will get different comments from different people. Some people say, oh, I love the gas, and others say, oh, the morphine was fabulous, and then you'll get alternative stories. So you're never quite sure how you or your body is going to respond to these things, but I would encourage you all to do some preparation. Things like yoga, learning yoga and meditation practices are really helpful. Doing classes like mine, Transform Your Birth, or other classes like Calm Birth and Hypnobirthing, where they do really work on helping you to relax and train yourself to respond to labour and birth in a way that doesn't create stress, which makes it harder. So by training your mind and body to down-regulate stress, making that labour easier and more manageable can really support you to not even need them. Okay, so I'd encourage you to cultivate the belief that you're not likely to need them, but also recognising that they can be appropriate under certain conditions. Now, I just want to add another little extra bit to this podcast, and this is a little bit of a hint for partners. This is a situation that's highly likely to happen. So let me paint another scenario for you. Prior to the labour, you've said to your partner, darling, I really don't want the drugs. And your partner or your birth support person, whoever you've got with you, say, yep, no worries, I've got your back. I'll find comfort for you. I'll help you to be comfortable. We've got this. And you're in labour. You're smiling through contractions. You're having a great time for a while. And then it heats up a little bit. And then you think, oh, no, I'm done with this. And you look at your partner or your birth support person, you say, you know what? I want the drugs. Now, they're caught between a rock and a hard place. They know you didn't want them, but now you're asking for them and they don't know what to do. Well, I'm going to give you a strategy. So you may want to write this down, because this will be a good thing to have a talk to the people that you're birthing with, to help them to understand how you want to manage that situation, because it is tricky. You never, ever, 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 ever want to say no to a woman who's asked for the drugs in labour. And I'll tell you why. Because when a woman's asking for drugs, what's she really asking for? Help. Okay, so if you say no, you're saying no to help, and you don't want to do that. But you don't want to go, yeah, all right, I'll go and get them either. Okay, you want to do a bit of checking. Does she really need this? So, number one, the first thing you do if the woman asks for the drugs is you validate her. You let her know you've heard her voice. It might sound like this. Darling, I can see that this is getting really hard for you now. I want you to know I'll do whatever it is you need me to do. This is a really important point. Women's voices need to be heard in labour. When women aren't listened to and fobbed off like, no, you don't need the drugs. You didn't want them, remember? You don't want to do that. Because you're not acknowledging and validating the full extent of what it is that she's experiencing. And so by validating her, letting her know you've heard her voice, helps her to relax and know that you've got her back. And that's so very important. Number two, the second thing you do is change whatever it is she's doing. So if she's rocking or she's in a certain position, probably the best thing to do is say, it's time to go to the toilet. So you get her up, you take her into the bathroom, she sits on the toilet. Now, toilet bowls happen to be quite comfortable in labour because they kind of open up a woman's pelvis. She's upright, can support the physiology of that labour. So she has a pee. And then when you take her back, unless she wants to stay there for a while, find a new position. So you change whatever it is she was doing, you just change. Now, when you change position, that supports the mother to recalibrate to this new position. And chances are you'll get away with just that alone. By changing her position, she helps to readjust, she finds comfort, and now she goes back to the work of focusing on birthing this baby. Okay, so you've kind of helped her get over the hump. So the next thing you do is watch her. You don't say, do you still want the drugs? Don't plant that seed. You just watch and see how she goes. Now, if she then looks at you once again with those demon eyes and says, all right, I'm ready for my epidural now, or whatever it is she's asked for, you say, okay, I can see that you still want this. Let me go and talk to the midwife and see what she can get going. When you go to the midwife, now this is a really important point as well, let the midwife know what her intentions were. So you say something along these lines. She's didn't want the drugs for this labour, but now she's asking for them. Could this be transition? Because transition is a time in the labour. It's at the end of the opening of the door, first stage of labour, which is the opening of the cervix. As she gets towards the end of that sort of, 9-10 centimetres of the door open, we call that transition. It's the time women ask for the drugs. It's the time they can't have them. To have morphine or an epidural, you can probably still have gas, but to have morphine and epidural at that particular stage of labour is bringing in complexity that you then have to overcome. Okay. Now, the problem with this stage of labour called transition is not transition itself. It's not knowing you're in transition. Once she knows, she's fine because she doesn't know how long she's got to labour for. And this is the problem that the mind has to overcome, is to just be in this moment right here, right now. And often that last couple of centimetres, I call it the cracking of the shell from the woman into the mother, where she wants to get off the bus, but she can't. She's got to push through. That's transition. And the signs of transition are things like, I've had enough of this, get me out of here, give me the drugs, I don't want to do this anymore. When women start to talk like that, it's typically signs of transition. So you ask the midwife, you say, could this be transition? Could you come and reassure her, please? Now, with the midwife's support, you can often help get her over the hump, or maybe she is still in early labour and she's having quite a long labour. It might be appropriate, but the midwife can help do a bit of a clinical analysis of where she's up to, and then together you make a decision which is the best and most appropriate way to go. But by getting the midwife involved, then you're going to be making much better decisions, knowing exactly where you're up to in the labour and keeping an eye on the fact that, you could be a lot closer to the end than you realise. So let me just review that again. Number 1, you validate her. Number 2, you change whatever it is she's doing. Number 3, you then watch her. Don't plant the seeds, just watch. If she asks again, you let her know that you've heard her again, and you say, let me go and see the midwife. And with the midwife's support, you make the decision. So I hope this has been helpful, because this is the sort of thing, if you can get her through without the drugs, she'll be quite grateful for that, typically. I'm pretty sure most women who are educated and they make a decision to try to do it without the drugs typically are very happy when they get through without them. Labour can be overwhelming, but the more you train yourself and the more you cultivate that belief and you start to work with your fears in labour, then the more your body can work with birth, not against it. I'll tell you a quick story. I worked with a woman having her 5th or 6th baby, I can never remember. And when I took on her I was her doula, she said to me, your job is to get me the epidural. Are we clear? I went, absolutely. I'm here to do whatever it is you need me to do. Now, the story was, with her first baby, she had an epidural and she loved it. And then with every baby after that, her body was quite efficient. She'd had a few children. And every time she went into the hospital to have these babies, she'd ask for an epidural and the midwife would say, no, you don't need it. You're nearly there. And kept sort of fobbing her off. And with each baby, she sunk more and more into fear and terror of experiencing contractions. And so by the time she reached out to me, having her fifth or sixth, never remember which one, fifth or sixth child, she truly was so scared of labour that she didn't want to go through it. So that was my job. Now, when I spoke to her, I said, look, I can do that and I will do that. However, I want you to do my course because you need to learn to relax. And she agreed and she did it and she loved it because when you've got that many children, learning to relax is a really great skill. So that was terrific. She went into labour. She called me in. And I remember walking into her labour room and she looked beautiful. She was so serene and relaxed looking. And I thought, oh, she's got this, And I went up to her with my husky tones and I said, how about we do a relaxation? And I took her into a beautiful relaxation. And I thought, yeah, we're good. And then she looked at me with those eyes and she said, I'm ready for my epidural now. Now, the first thing that popped into my head was, you don't need an epidural. But of course, this is what everybody else had said to her. So I went off to the midwife and said, look, we need to get her an epidural. The midwife was like, she's nearly ready to have the baby. She doesn't need one. And then I explained the history. And so we did it. We got her an epidural. Now, I suspect she was fully dilated and that baby was just sitting there. But this was what was important for her. This is what empowerment was for her voice to be heard. So she got the epidural and she's sitting up in bed looking like the Queen of Sheba and we're having a lovely chat and she's there for a couple of hours and then the midwife said, come on, Tracey, let's get this baby born. And we flipped her over onto all fours and the baby started to come. Now, I was up near her head and it was in that moment that I saw it. I saw the terror that was just there. And I gave her the gas. She sucked on the gas and she birthed that baby and she was absolutely delighted. That birth taught me a really big lesson that we should never, ever not listen to women's voices. And by listening to her voice and helping her to feel like she was being respected was the most important thing for her transition into birth. So it taught me a big lesson about never having an agenda about whether a woman has the drugs or not. And I think it's important partners realise that it is not your call, it is her call. Okay? What she's going through is big and it's a transformational process. She's cracking that shell from the woman into the mother. She has to push through. She has to realise she's much bigger than what she thinks. And that's what your baby needs from you. And so it's in that transition that when women feel heard, respected, and their choices are honoured and validated, then she can make that transition in the way that's right for her. So I was very grateful for having that experience because it taught me never to have an agenda. It's a woman's choice and we need to honour that. So I hope this has been a useful podcast for you. I've really enjoyed sharing some of the wonderful things that we do in our classes. And I would encourage all of you to prepare for birth. It's worth it because it's a very intense moment and it's that transition into motherhood and it sets the scene for what happens on the other side. So have a great week. We'll see you again next week. And it's been lovely sharing this time with you. Bye-bye. This episode has been brought to you by Transform Parenting, an organisation that provides courses, coaching and community from pregnancy through to the first 7 years of a child's life. It is a place where you can learn, get support and grow into your role as a parent. Our Transform Your Birth course, both in Canberra and online, is waiting for you to feel calmer and more confident to give birth and change the way you labour. Or why not watch our free masterclass on Keeping Relaxed and Excited About Birth, where we discuss the 3 most important things that can change a birth. You'll find us at our website on www.transformparenting.com.au.